I graduated from school in 1964, and I went to work for the Sixties. And at that time, that was sort of end of the era, but they pulled a wagon with 4 mules and a hood wagon with 2 mules, and we'd leave Guthrie. All us cowboys drove the horses, but we'd leave Guthrie and go 20 miles south and west, south and east to the QB pasture, big old pasture, and camp there for several days. And what they were doing, this was in the summer. Brandon was over, and we wasn't winning. All this country down here had anthrax, and it killed a lot of cattle, my dad's included. And you had to burn those carcasses because it would get in the ground if you didn't. So that's what they do. We'd work down here and move the cattle back north out of this anthrax country, and we'd stay down here and work. And then I don't know why they thought they had to get every cow, but the campman over here at the Taylor camp, we were friends with him, me and John, my brother just older than me. So we'd go there and help him gather the remnant cattle. I mean, we were pretty young to be doing that, but we thought we wasn't. But anyway, we were going to meet at this tank, and we did. Me and John got there first, and I got off and got a drink of water, which was common that day. Even still, drain out of a tank, nothing wrong with it, I thought. But here come that camp man. We visited him in. He says, "Y'all didn't drink out of that tank, did you?" He knew we did. He said, "Y'all didn't drink out of that tank, did you?" "Yes, sir. It's quarantined for anthrax." Well, I thought for the next 2 miles I had anthrax. I could feel it coming on. And but anyway, I worked up there a good while at 63, 3 years part time, and worked around some good cowboys, real good cowboys, and the crew was young, the brush was thick, and the cattle were wild. So that's just what I wanted. There's no way to operate, but that's how it was back then. That's been 50 years ago. So they'd issue us 7 horses when we went to work there. And in about a month, they was all drawn down because it was just ripping and running, and not all the time, but did a lot of ripping and running. And they, like I say, there's some of those boys, good hands. Of course, some of them wouldn't. And they always had a cook. There's one cook in particular. We was camped down there, and we all left out early that morning after breakfast. Came back in, and that cook was passed out on a cot, drunk, drinking vanilla. So they fired him right there, hauled him to town. One of the guys helping us, older guy, he said he could cook, so they put him cooking. And
that was because it was a dry wagon. You couldn't have liquor, but there's alcohol in vanilla.
Yeah.
Oh, dang.
They don't want you keeping liquor there, but like Gage says, vanilla will do it if you just can stand it. I guess I never have tried it.
He told me that when I was little. I got a little bottle of vanilla, and I didn't want to drink enough of it to make an effect. It was nasty.
But
One
you
time,
thought you were a bad dude.
Yeah.
One time we was camped up there north of Guthrie, 8 or 10 miles, and it wasn't when I was working there. It was before then. John and I went up there just to help over the weekend because we like to do that. Well, we all was there, all the crew. It's Saturday, and they let all the men go to town to bathe. Well, me and John, we didn't think we needed to bathe, so the cook and an old hood he's an alcoholic, and they were there with me and John, brother John. So we visited around there, and that old cook says, boys, I just been fooling around. He says, I can cook good. I'm going to cook you a good supper. And this alcoholic said, that sounds good to me. He says, I'll build the fire. Well, there's already some coals, a little fire going, and he picked up a jug or something, poured in there, and it was lantern fuel is what it was, just like gasoline. Throwed it in there, and man, those flames come out every which way. And it didn't bother us, but the fellow that threw it in there, it burned his hand. So we asked him if he was all right. Yeah, he's about half drunk. Yeah, he is all right. Well, in about an hour, he says, you boys are going to have to take me to town, to the doctor. He had an old car there, a Plymouth. So we loaded him up in the Plymouth and took him to Paducah, got him in the hospital. They put him in bed, and nurse wasn't around. We didn't think. He says, Tom, go out there and get that pint of whiskey out of the glove compartment of my car. I said, okay, yes, sir. I just thought she's supposed to mind him. I started out, this big old nurse stopped me and says, don't you go get that whiskey. So anyway, we got old Orville Sensible bedded down and started to leave. Well, he had a flat on the car. And we got a lug wrench and we raunched on it and raunched on it and raunched on it. It was an L-shaped lug wrench. We decided we was going to have a four-way. Well, we walked downtown, there's a station still open, and got a four-way and came back. We still couldn't get them off. We walked back town. That guy asked us what kind of car it was. We told him. He says, you twist them the other way.
Oh, dang.
So we had them tightened up pretty good. And those cars like that used to be that way.
Yeah, Studebakers, weren't
they? Yeah, it might have been a Studebaker. But anyway, we made it back to the wagon. The next morning, we was trotting along there, and the wagon boss and me and John were pretty close together. And that wagon boss said, I asked John, he says, was Orwell drunk last night, John? And John said, no, sir, no, sir. And John says, Royce knew I was lying. It didn't want to tell on him, you know.
Yes, sir.
It didn't cause any trouble. But anyway, I had a lot of experiences up there. They issued me 7 blue horses. And some of them were out of Gray Badger. And he wasn't gentle. His horses wasn't gentle. Most of the time I could get them rode, but not every time. And I remember one time getting bucked off, and that horse, Amos, he run off. I didn't know where the next man was, anybody was. And I climbed up the tree where I could see somebody. Somebody come along. I got on behind him, got my horse. And then another time I remember the same horse, Amos, we was camped there at the Mitchell Pens, and Beggin Bradley, the wagon boss, told us we was going to move the wagon into headquarters. Well, we'd had a lot of trouble, a lot of work. We were glad, and everybody jobbed their horses and headed out to change horses. And I jobbed old Amos, and he threw me just as flat on the ground as you could get. And anyway, I had a lot of respect for that horse after that. I didn't job him anymore. I'll put it that way. And then, so I left there. My oldest brother, Ed, went to Sul Ross for a while. John went to Sul Ross for a while. And I went there and graduated there. And while I was there, I day worked for a fellow named Gage Holland. That's who Gage is named after. And me and Sue, my first wife, she worked too. She's secretary, and she was a cowgirl. She rode with us. And I helped them, and then I broke a good many horses. And I tell this story because it's sort of funny, but my wife, Sue, we wasn't married, and she went out to the ranch where I was starting a bunch of colts. And I'd ride one, then change saddle, ride another. And I come back and I says, what do you think? And she says, that horse chained his leads real well. I didn't have any idea what she was talking about. My daddy wouldn't have known what a lead was when he died. It just wasn't something that we knew, you know. We didn't, I mean, never was told about it. And I've always said the men back then rode a horse thousands of miles and got the work done on him. Did all work, drug carried, worked the herd, whatever. But they're not horsemen back then the way they are now. Nowadays, the horsemen are better. Like talking about leads, they know all about it. Gage is a whole lot better horseman than I am, and I've rode many miles further. But anyway, I'm not taking away from those old timers because they did it all. But I'm just saying their horsemanship, very few I can think of back then were much horsemen. I know two or three that sort of